Okay, but yeah, we're going to be looking at Judges chapter 10. It's going to start on page 73 in your book. And before we get into that, why don't we just open up in a word of prayer. Holy Father, we thank you for this day that you've given us. We thank you for the opportunity, even for just a few of us, to gather and to look at this next part of your word. And I just pray that you be with us during this study and help us to see clearly and understand what you have for us in this time. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. All right, we're in Judges chapter 10, continuing the saga of a whole bunch of judges. Yes. Make sure the candy's front and center. It's the important stuff. It's all good. It's all good. So this lesson, the book is really focusing on the topic of sincerity. I personally think the book is going a little overboard on this. I think they want it to be a little neater and cleaner than I think the text actually is. And we'll get into that, but we can get a little bit of it with these opening questions. Have you ever purposely said something with an insincere tone? Now, there's less of us, so we can feel free to confess anything that's on your mind. Yeah, that was what I thought. Saying something purposefully with an insincere tone seems odd, unless it's sarcasm. Yeah, because if I was saying something insincerely, I wouldn't try to say it insincerely, typically, that's at least how I think of what they're saying. Yeah, I'm sure I've said things insincerely, not on purpose, many times. But, okay, question 2. How do those who heard you respond? Yeah, have you ever been sarcastic and someone didn't quite get that when you said it? Yeah. Now with like masks and stuff, when you can't read people's face, that's tricky. Okay, so we're going with this idea of sincerity. So the text definitely does open with it. What about a person's tone can indicate if someone is speaking sincerely or not? You don't think it matters? Yeah. What might be a sign that, like, someone is saying something insincerely? Okay. Is there anything else is there anything else that would make you think that someone was insincere in what they said?
Some people think there's no emotion. You're talking, but you seem like you're disconnected. You're really not.
Yeah.
Or you didn't quite say the words they expect. Like when we talk to each other, we expect certain words.
Yeah.
Like in a certain situation, we don't get that. So, body language, attitude, people read all kinds of stuff into those terms.
Yeah. Okay. You got the classic, I'm sorry that you're upset. Some of those like half apologies, some of the weird, there can be a lot of markers of it. And we definitely see that at a certain point that we'll get to. The first 5 verses, I'm not even going to read. They open up with 2 judges back to back who we know almost nothing about, Tola and Jair. They mention a few little things, but for the most part we have no conflict. There's nothing. They just they're judges, they die, the next judge comes. It's all pretty good. The one interesting thing that the book points out, though, so Jair, we can actually read that. Jair's interesting. Verse 3. After him arose Jair, the Gileadite, and judged Israel 22 years. And he had 30 sons that rode on 30 ass colts, and they had 30 cities, which are called Havoth Jair, unto this day, which are in the land of Gilead. The book points out that Jair, so he was a judge in Gilead, in the land of Gad on the east side of Jordan. He was named after the great-great-grandson of Manasseh, who captured 60 cities in Gilead. Jair's 30 sons each controlled one of the cities. It's just an interesting little, I'm not exactly sure why the text includes it, but the last guy who had this name, he captured these 60 cities. This Jair, his sons seem to control at least half of them. It's interesting, and it kind of shows you what's happening with the judges. Like, they're almost taking on a quasi-kingly role because Jair was judge and then his sons ruled these cities. So we're sort of seeing a change in judgeship a little bit. But we have them, and they came after Abimelech, who we talked about last week, who was just an absolute train wreck, that bad son of Gideon who killed everyone. Okay, but we can start in verse 6. And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and served Balaam and Ashtaroth, and the gods of Syria, the gods of Zidon, the gods of Moab, and the gods of the children of Ammon, and the gods of the Philistines, and forsook the Lord, and served him not. This is probably on page 75 in your book, question 3. Why would Israel adopt the gods of their enemies while forsaking God altogether?
Part of the mixed culture thing, right? They didn't defeat the enemies before, so they started mixing again.
Mm-hmm.
Slowly adopted the ways of the people that they were mixing with.
Yeah, okay. Any, reason? Why would you do that?
It's easier to get along with them.
Mm.
They were probably going to forsake their gods for the God of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the people that didn't really have a strong connection for one reason or another maybe went the other way.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's probably a little easier to serve the pagan God.
How so?
The rules, regulations,
Mm-hmm.
God's law was a little bit higher. Morality and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The time of integrity, commanded integrity, morality, and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the pagan religions, it demanded you serve to God,
Yeah.
but it had a lower level of expectation for the individual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. And if you notice, one of the slight differences in this, it's normal, it's run-of-the-mill what we expect from judges, that they start going after other gods. But the fact that it actually says they forsook the Lord. So if you remember, when we talked about Gideon's father seemed to be closely connected with Baal, he was responsible for having the altar to Baal in their city. But Gideon still knew about the God of the Bible, so they were being very pagan and worshiping multiple gods, including the true God. And now it seems like they have adopted all the pagan deities and just have nothing to do with God. So they're sort of like another step. It's like you're worshiping other gods and you completely left the one you were supposed to. So things, even just right off the bat, it breaks the pattern we've been seeing in a way that is devolving. It's all just getting worse. Okay, and then, so I don't think we actually had a problem yet. Yeah, verse 7. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines, into the hands of the children of Ammon. And that year they vexed and oppressed the children of Israel 18 years. All the children of Israel that were on the other side of the Jordan, in the land of the Amorites, which is Gilead. Moreover, the children of Ammon passed over Jordan to fight against Judah and against Benjamin, against the house of Ephraim, so that Israel was sore distressed. So we remember that there were the two tribes there are 10 tribes in Israel. 2 of them are on the other side of the Jordan. They didn't go into the promised land proper, and they've sort of been an issue. So Israel's being judged for their sin kind of normal. And it seems like they're more messing with the people on the other side of the Jordan. And that's cool for like 18 years. Everyone's like, well, it is what it is. Then they cross the Jordan and start messing with Benjamin and Judah and some of the more northern tribes. Then they decide we need to do something. It's kind of like, it's fine as long as they're just messing with those people, those Israelites. And then when they cross the river, now we have a problem. Now it actually affects us, verse 10. And the children of Israel cried unto the Lord, saying, We have sinned against thee, both because we have forsaken our God and also served Balaam. The Lord said unto the children of Israel, Did not I deliver you from the Egyptians, and from the Amorites, from the children of Ammon, and from the Philistines? The Zidonians also, and the Amalekites, and the Maonites did oppress you. Ye cried unto me, and I delivered you out of their hand. Yet ye have forsaken me, and served other gods. Wherefore I will deliver you no more. Go and cry unto the gods which ye have chosen. Let them deliver you in the time of your tribulation. So what just happened there? What's happening, what's not happening? Yeah. Yeah, for the first time, again, breaking the cycle. So they sort of went further with their idolatry, and instead of God kind of rushing in to save the day, he stands back, which is interesting at the very least. It's another sign of things just going further downhill, because we sort of know what it's supposed to look like. And verse 15 and 16. The children of Israel said unto the Lord, We have sinned. Do thou unto us whatsoever seemeth good unto thee. Deliver us only, we pray thee, this day. They put away the strange gods from among them and served the Lord. And his soul was grieved for the misery of Israel. All right, 2 questions about that. Verse 16. I get 2 big things from verse 16. Tell me what you see there. One about the people, one about God.
The people, they're feigning repentance again, right? It's only a very short time until they're ready to do something else. I'm sure 10 verses later they'll be back at it again.
Okay, so you think it's insincerity for what they'll do in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I'm in trouble now, save me, and then, I'm out of it, I'll do whatever I want. It's been the same pattern for the last
Yeah. Okay.
several hundred years of this.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, that never happens today.
No. Yeah.
Putting away, does that mean does it mean just that, okay, we'll shelf this for now? You know what I mean? It's kind of like,
Yeah.
again, the sincerity thing.
Well, so that's not an uncommon term for when they even get rid of the, because serving the pagan gods, you probably had, the physical idols. But that is an interesting thing so they cried out to God before. And this time, they're getting rid of their idols and false gods. So I find it interesting that, so talk about insincerity. They turned back to God, but didn't seem to get rid of any of the other gods. Like I told you, they kind of went 2 steps because they worshipped other gods and then they left the Lord. So then they came back to the Lord, but they still had the other gods around. And insincere, we'll follow you as you have your shrine set up in your house. And then I thought it was really, it's one of the few nice, touching moments in Judges, I think, what we see about the character of God in this, that when they finally do repent, even if, some years later it's going to be undone. What's the exact phrase? At the end of verse 16, his soul was grieved for the misery of Israel. It's funny how, especially we're in the book of Judges, there's some brutal stuff in the book of Judges. If people try to make arguments about like, oh, the angry, violent Old Testament God, this is a pretty safe book to turn to if you're trying to make that argument sometimes. But then you have this switch where he's like so quick to turn to compassion. I mean, that's the argument of Jonah, that like that's why he didn't want to go to the Assyrians, because he's like, if I preach to them, you're merciful, you're long-suffering, you'll turn from it and save them if they cry out to you. Like that's his argument, you know. Okay, we need to actually get to what Jepthah's doing, though. Our next judge is going to be named Jepthah, by the way, in case you weren't reading ahead. Okay, let's look at chapter 11, verse 1. So we know what the problems are. Now Jepthah, the Gileadite, was a mighty man of valor, and he was the son of a harlot, and Gilead begot Jepthah, and Gilead's wife bare him sons, and his wife's son grew up, and they thrust out Jepthah, and said unto him, Thou shalt not inherit our father's house, for thou art the son of a strange woman. Jepthah fled from his brethren, and dwelt in the land of Tob, and there were gathered vain men to Jepthah, and went out with him. What is happening here? I think the language is actually a little vague, the way it gets translated, but what's happening here with Jepthah?
He's considered an outsider by his lineage, his dad.
Yeah, no, I got you there. Yeah, so his other brothers want nothing to do with him. What do you think's happening in verse 3 specifically with... vain men were gathered unto him, and they went out with him. Like, what does this mean to you?
Probably other outcasts,
Mm-hmm.
like himself,
Yeah.
kind of gravitate all together as befriending each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the last time vain men was used was last chapter with Abimelech, when he got his, like, gang together. Yeah. So what Israel's doing, they sort of decide, okay, we have this problem, we have these invading armies. You know what? The person who can like defeat this army, we'll put him in charge. There's no judge right now. Whoever can do that, he'll be in charge. So the text backs up. We get this story of Jephthah's upbringing and what happened to him. You have these vain people who are around him. And the fact that it says they went out with him. It's kind of like, all right, they hanging out? Probably not. So the textbook on page 76, I don't know, it's probably towards the bottom of your page. I want to see what you think about this. I'm just going to read it. After being rejected, Jepthah went to the land of Tob and gathered a group of men to go out raiding with him. That sounds sinister, but there's no evidence that Jepthah was doing anything wrong. We might liken him to David, who gathered his own band of misfits to do the Lord's work without an official office. David did that. Does this remind you more of David or Abimelech?
Feels like the term raiding is usually in a negative context. Like,
Yeah.
There's no context to saying that he went out and attacked the enemies of Israel.
Mhm.
He went raiding. It could be, attacking small caravans for goods because
Mhm.
there's a bunch of other outcasts that need
Yeah.
supplies or food or whatever.
Mm-hmm. That's the feeling I got from it. Like, does anyone see the book's view?
I mean, I can understand it.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a group,
Yeah.
all the outcasts, so it's.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I would think maybe they're pillaging the enemy once in a while,
Mhm.
they need,
Mm-hmm.
intermittent, raids here and there,
Mm-hmm.
that type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and the truth is the text doesn't say. Like, so with David, it was very clear he's going to the enemies of Israel. He's sort of doing what King Saul wasn't doing because he was too busy hunting David down. He's going out. It doesn't say they went out into the camps of the Amorites or the Philistines or Israel. The book tries really hard to make Jepthah the hero of the story. And I get the impulse, but I don't think it's that clean. I think if the Bible wanted us to see him as like a righteous and holy person, it would present him that way clearly, you know? So you have this situation with Israel's being attacked. We need a judge. We need someone to come in. You have this man. And did you notice chapter 11, in verse 1, Jepthah, the Gileadite, was a mighty man of valor. Who was the last mighty man of valor? Do you remember that phrase? Pastor remembers the phrase. You probably remember it. You're probably scrolling through all the strange names we've come across. So that was Gideon. Yeah. So remember, that was the one where we're pretty sure the angel of the Lord was being sarcastic with him as he's hiding from the enemy, threshing his wheat. So I think that's going to be important for later. Just remember, the last time it was Gideon, who was also from this region of Gilead. That's going to be important later. But so basically, long story short, the people come to Jepthah and they say, hey, we have this problem. If you come back, help lead us into battle, you can be, they don't really use the term judge, but you can be over us. And he takes some convincing because he's been thrust out of society his whole life. But eventually he says, okay, yeah, sure, we'll come and do this if you'll honor your word. And let's look at chapter 11, verse 10. And the elders of Gilead said unto Jepthah, the Lord be witness between us, if we do not according to thy word. So they actually make a vow. They tell, before God, we will make you the leader. No matter, if you do this, you're the leader. The book tries to get into some stuff with Joshua. If you're interested in your spare time, you can look into that. There's some stuff with sincerity in the book of Joshua that they link to. But we're going to look at verse 12. And Jepthah sent messengers unto the king of the children of Ammon, saying, what hast thou to do with me, that thou art come against me to fight in my land? And the king of the children of Ammon answered unto the messengers of Jepthah, because Israel took away my land when they came up out of Egypt, from Arnon even to Jabbok, and unto Jordan. Now, therefore, restore those lands again peaceably. This also, I don't know that they're trying to break the cycle as much here as they did before, like we talked about, but I found it interesting that for the first time, there's actually a little diplomacy with the enemy. So when he's Jepthah sends messengers, and he's like, hey, what are you doing here? Why are you guys attacking? Why are you raiding? So, which is interesting that they didn't seem to know before. And he actually gives a coherent reason. He's like, oh, well, yeah, when you guys came out of Egypt, you took this land that belonged to us. Roughly, do you know, what's the time frame here? How far removed from Egypt do you think we are? Was it a year ago or?
Out of Egypt, a couple hundred years. Because they wandered 4 years in the desert to start with. And then...
Yeah, ballpark 300-ish. And now it's a problem. Okay, so I won't read Jepthah's response because it goes from verse, what he sends with his messengers. It's verse 12 through 27, so it's a very long thing, but the book actually says it very well on page 78. On page 78, there's a paragraph that starts with Jepthah's response. All right, Jepthah's response was threefold. reflecting his knowledge of Israel's history and his appreciation for God. He first challenged Ammon's historical accuracy. Israel had not taken the land from the Ammonites, but from the Amorites, who had refused to allow Israel to pass through the land. The second point of Jepthah's response was theological. Israel had not taken the land, rather the Lord had given it to them. The Ammonites' problem was really with God, not Israel. Jepthah reminded the Ammonites that they would certainly lay claim to any land they believed that their god, Chemosh, had given them. The third part of Jepthah's reply was that Israel had occupied the land for 300 years without Ammon making any such claim during that time. So, that's a pretty well-rounded, well-reasoned reply. And then what I find hysterical, verse 28, "Howbeit the king of the children of Ammon hearkened not unto the words of Jepthah, which he sent him." So, yes, the Bible gives this really long explanation, this really eloquent thing from Jepthah, and the king's just, nah, I'm not going to, listens to nothing. Just no go there. And then look at verse 27. Jepthah saying, Wherefore I have not sinned against thee, but thou dost me wrong to war against me. The Lord, the judge, be judge this day between the children of Israel and the children of Ammon. And question 9 in the book asks, awkwardly, summarize Jepthah's view of God from his closing statement to the Ammonites. Where do you think he's kind of falling with God at this?
I don't know if he's taking God personally, but he definitely recognizes God as part of Israeli history and important to their existence. Let's put that way.
Yeah.
In the promised land.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
He was building his case on that premise that
yeah.
the Lord is not
Mm-hmm.
make this available to us, and this is, I'm presenting this case for all this.
Yeah. Yeah, like he seems pretty on track with that statement, right? Like it's a pretty solid statement. Were you going to say something? You looked like you were going to.
Pretty amazing statement, actually, because if he's saying that, that God, gave this land to the Israelites, and conversely he made the argument that their God did. So is the king really sinning against Israel by attacking them, or is it their God sinning against Israel?
Ah, yeah.
Because, it's like you can use your God to justify taking the land, but they can't use theirs.
Mm-hmm.
So is the invading army actually sinning against them, or is it the God of their army sinning against them?
No, I didn't think about that. That's pretty interesting. Yeah, it is. It's funny that he makes that counter argument. He's like, hey, yeah, if you thought your God had given you land, you wouldn't hesitate to take it, which is interesting, and you never see, because the guy doesn't listen to him. You don't know if he says like, oh yeah, no, that's what happened. That's what's happening. But like from this standpoint, Jepthah sort of seems pretty on track with his thinking. He's even the idea that God is judge, and then you just have these men sort of standing in the place of that. It's sort of like what was supposed to happen.
In my commentary here, I know he's laying his case out for the Ammonites.
Yeah.
It says the Ammonites were descendants of Lot,
Mm-hmm.
Abraham's nephews, so they certainly knew God's sovereignty and all that kind of stuff even back then.
It was a long time before.
A long time before.
Yeah.
It's not like it was too far removed. I mean, they knew the God of Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
even though they're wayward, they knew God's
Yeah.
workings with Abraham.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, they were close relatives, sort of, that they did not get along very well at all. Yeah, we don't need to get into Lot. That's a mess. But yeah, so we have Jepthah basically being more or less on track with some minor deity inconsistencies there, as Greg pointed out. But so Okay, the war is set. He's like, all right, you aren't listening to me. God will judge between us. Let's go. So verse 30. And Jepthah vowed a vow unto the Lord and said, if thou shalt without fail to deliver the children of Ammon into my hand, then it shall be that whatsoever cometh forth of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. So, do you remember this at all? Is this story starting to maybe click any like Sunday school type bells here? No, maybe not. Doesn't have to be. You know, when I was rereading, it occurred to me like, oh, like I was getting through the whole thing and they go, oh, right. Yeah, no, I know this guy. Okay.
I think he's hoping it's going to be his dog.
His dog. Okay, so you do remember the story, yeah. So again, it sounds good. Like, hey, if God does this for us, first thing through the gate when I come back, that it'll be a burnt offering, a sacrifice to God. So the battle is incredibly uneventful. This has mostly been talking. The battle takes place in like a verse or two. They go out, they win the battle, and the end of verse 33. Thus the children of Ammon were subdued before the children of Israel. Simple enough. Verse 34, and Jepthah came to Mizpah unto his house, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with timbrels and with dances, and she was his only child. Beside her he had neither son nor daughter. And it came to pass when he saw her, that he rent his clothes, and said, alas, my daughter, thou hast brought me very low, and thou art one of them that trouble me. For I have opened my mouth unto the Lord, and I cannot go back. She said unto him, my father, if thou hast opened thy mouth unto the Lord, do to me according to that which proceedeth out of thy mouth. For as much as the Lord has taken vengeance for thee of thine enemies, even of the children of Ammon. And she said unto her father, let this one thing be done for me. Let me alone 2 months, that I may go up and down upon the mountains, and bewail my virginity, I and my fellows. And he said, go, and he sent her away for 2 months. And she went with her companions, and bewailed her virginity upon the mountains. And it came to pass at the end of 2 months, that she returned unto her father, who did with her according to his vow which he had vowed. And she knew no man. And it was a custom in Israel, that the daughters of Israel went yearly to lament the daughter of Jepthah, the Gileadite, 4 days in a year. So we know about the vow. We know, I'm sure he did not expect his daughter to walk through the gate, although that seems like a perfectly reasonable person to come through the gate of your house. What do you think happened with the daughter? There's a few theories that roll around. What happened here?
Text suggests that she went up into the mountain, I guess, lamented the fact that she was, had no husband
Mm-hmm.
and no children. And then it seemed to suggest that when he came back, he did exactly what he said he was going to do
Mm-hmm.
and sacrificed her.
Mm-hmm. So that's one theory. Does anyone think anything different?
You wouldn't unless you knew a little bit of Israel's history.
Okay.
So, but if you just read it straight up,
Yeah.
he opened it.
Mm-hmm.
He had enough, still had enough human in him to go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
But, it'd be sort of like Samuel, was offered to the Lord
Mm-hmm.
for what God had done for his mother.
Yeah.
But here though it says a burnt offering.
Mm-hmm.
And with Samuel, that's not that's not the verbiage.
Mm-hmm.
And they did do human sacrifice, the people around the Israelites
Yeah.
back then. The Israelites did that, when they were in their heathen mode.
Mm-hmm.
They did that, periodically.
Yeah.
So I myself, I don't think it's out of the
Yeah.
picture of the gate, he might have done it.
Right.
And there's a slight possibility maybe, you know, she was for the Lord's service and ministry or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she never got married, never had children,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. So,
Yeah, so that's the debate among Old Testament scholars. It's the idea of, okay, it does say burnt offering. However, what comes through the gate is not an animal, but a person. So some people have the opinion that he didn't actually kill her, that he, like Samuel, actually offered her basically as like the ancient Near Eastern version of a nun, if you can think about it that way, and that people think that's why there's such a heavy emphasis on, like it even says, when she comes back to the Father, she knew no man, and that even as the only child, there's no heir, there's no passage of anything on Jepthah's side, and that maybe he actually just sort of gave her in service to the tabernacle. I don't know. I don't think anyone... You have to know a little bit about, like Pastor said, Israelite history to even come up with the idea that maybe he didn't kill her. That's what I would hope happened.
Would it be because she has a soul and like animals don't? Would that be a defining thing for them?
Yeah, there's nothing in the text that I think really... The other thing is an argument from history and from what they know about certain practices of the people. To me, the only argument I can actually make from the text is burnt offering. You know, I like the other idea, and there are some things that kind of point to that a little bit. But yeah, from the text, all I can see clearly is it says burnt offering.
that's how I always read it.
Yeah.
Thought of it. But there's, you know, a little bit of a possibility it might be something else, but the burnt offering thing is the issue.
Yeah.
And it's not past him to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just like Abraham offering his son.
Mm.
You know, as much as God revealed himself to Abraham, it's still Abraham's pagan background. They did child sacrifice back then.
Mm.
It wasn't past Abraham's mind that he would do that.
Yeah.
He literally was going to do it. So, you know, so we're back to Abraham again. And
Yeah.
it was about 900 years before this.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so either way, it's strange. Okay, so I think towards the bottom of page 79, it says stepping back. Stepping back and considering the greater context of Judges, the vow episode fits in well. Jepthah made the vow out of faith in God. God then used the vow to test Jepthah's sincerity. God made it difficult for him by sovereignly sending his daughter through the doorway first. The daughter's response to the news is very telling. What do you think of that statement?
now they're reading the text.
Yes.
What they're doing, they're painting a pretty nice picture of things.
Yeah.
And you know, you guys know, right? Because I don't know if this is really about, this could be family loyalty and stuff like that, and honoring shame to the family.
Yeah.
And honoring your father, Jepthah, and all that, and have very little to do with God per se.
Mm-hmm.
Either outcome of, you know, she's like, yeah, I'll do whatever you said you gotta go. Either like, hey, sorry, you're never gonna get married, and you're gonna get, you know, whisked away to the temple forever.
Yeah.
Or, yeah, I gotta take y'all back. You know, either one of those is like not something that you want to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the book assumes the second option, that she's sort of like a nun. And you have to assume that in order to say what they just said. I always kind of took the text as like, this went tragically wrong for him. Like, maybe it was a nice idea that he would vow to offer whatever came through the gate, and then it was like a ridiculous twist, sort of like It always reminds me of Midas, like, because he accidentally turned his daughter to gold, like that whole story. The book really tries to paint it as this was a good thing. The vow was good. God sent the daughter through to test Jephtha's faith. I don't see it either. I don't see Jephtha as being anything but the bad guy in this situation. Like, even if he didn't fully intend that to happen, this doesn't look good on him. I don't see this as answering a call to faith. I don't see it like an Abraham type thing.
You notice God didn't step in if it was a human sacrifice and tell him not to sacrifice it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how close was his
Yeah.
walk with God?
Yeah, that's what I put on, because, like I said before, I thought he was more historical, and God's involved in the history of Israel,
Mm-hmm.
but there's not a whole lot of personal relationship going on.
Right.
So he's still on the pagan side of things a lot.
Yeah.
Because it seemed to me he's more motivated to leave and all that because of his clansmen coming and saying, listen, we really need you this time.
Yeah.
And whatever his vows were,
Mm-hmm.
that was a commitment to the situation. He's actually going to do this in front of, I would assume, God, but
Mm-hmm.
and there probably was some kind of sacrifice made since it's some kind of official ceremony that he's going to leave.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see him as being real spiritual.
No.
I just don't.
And it's interesting. There's no sign that like God doesn't really seem to talk to him ever. And I mean, like, historically, he's in good company there. But when you're dealing with the judges, granted, not every, like, Ehud. We don't have any verse that says God told Ehud to make this blade and do that. Like, we don't have that with all the judges. But we distinctly, we definitely don't have it here. We just have no indication that God called him, that God wanted him, like, God wanted him to do anything in particular. He did deliver them. I mean, so I guess that's something. But yeah, let's move on with that. All right, so that's how chapter 11 ends, and then Jephtha's story goes just 7 verses in, but just looking at the first verse, chapter 12, verse 1. And the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together and went northward, and said unto Jephtha, Wherefore passest thou over to fight against the children of Ammon, and did not call us to go with thee? We will burn thine house upon thee with fire. When did this happen before? Do you remember this? Gideon. So remember before, mighty man of valor. Okay. Do you remember how it went with Gideon?
I think he said, I didn't do anything here. You
Mhm.
guys did all the fighting.
Yeah.
He just sort of brushed off his own importance in the event to appease them.
Yeah, he was kind of humble and kind of smooth-talked him, and he got him to back off, and they went home happy. Keep that in mind. Okay, verse 2. And Jepthah said unto them, I and my people were at great strife with the children of Ammon, and when I called you, you delivered me not out of their hands. And when I saw that you delivered me not, I put my life in my hands and passed over against the children of Ammon and the Lord, and delivered them into my hand. And the Lord delivered them into my hand. Wherefore then are ye come up unto me this day to fight against me? And Jepthah gathered together all the men of Gilead, and fought with Ephraim. And the men of Gilead smote Ephraim, because they said, Ye Gileadites are fugitives of Ephraim, among the Ephraimites, and among the Manassites. And the Gileadites took the passages of the Jordan before the Ephraimites, and it was so that when the Ephraimites which escaped said, Let me go over, that the men of Gilead said unto them, Art thou an Ephraimite? If he said no, then they said unto him, Say now Shibboleth. And he would say Sibboleth, for he could not frame to pronounce it right. Then they took him and slew him at the passage of Jordan. And there fell at that time of the Ephraimites 42,000. Did not go as well as it did with Gideon. There's a few things that are happening here that I'm not sure how to take. So, for example, Jepthah's accusation in verse 2, when he says to them, "So I and my people were at great strife with the children of Ammon, and when I called you, you delivered me not out of their hands." Now, I know we skipped around a little bit. I saw no indication in the text that he called them. Maybe he did. I don't know. Like, you have to be sure that he's telling the truth in this situation. Now, we know the Ephraimites are sort of problematic. They always seem to, again, this happened again, that they seem to be kind of bloodthirsty, looking for glory and probably loot. But we really have nothing to back up anything that Jepthah said. Okay, so in your book on page 80, there's a paragraph. It starts with "again." Should be in your book. "Again, Jepthah takes a bad..." This is said amusingly. "Again, Jepthah takes a bad rap for killing so many fellow Israelites. But remember that Ephraim had a history of being insincere," which death is normally the punishment for, of course. Also remember, Joshua made it extremely clear for Israel to fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity and truth. This book is really trying to make him the good guy, and I don't know how to do that. Even if he had called them to battle, let's say he's telling the truth and this happened off screen, if we can put it that way, that doesn't seem like a measured response. And it's interesting. Even though you may not know the name Jepthah, right off the top of your head, you probably knew the story about the guy sacrificing his daughter, and you've probably heard Shibboleth. So that's an interesting. It's interesting in a few ways. So one, what they did was they took the riverbanks, the fords. If you remember from the story of Gideon, when Ephraim was very helpful, they took the river, the fords they called them, and that was their key point. That's how they actually were able to rout and defeat, I forget which invading army it was in that case, but that was an important military victory of Ephraim for God, for the mission that was happening. Now you have Jepthah. He's chasing them back. He slaughters them, takes the fords, and so that's a odd, problematic reversal in itself. But then the Shibboleth is interesting, sort of using it like a code word, because the Ephraimites don't seem to have a letter in their vocabulary that makes that SH sound, which I think tells you a lot about the relationship between the tribes, because they're all related, and they're, I think, typically free to even intermarry if they want to. But they're so locked in their own ways, especially on the other side of the Jordan, that they have a completely different dialect. They can't even say the word, I could think of examples in modern language, but I feel like that would get us off course. Certain things, honestly, when I studied Spanish, I could not roll my R's to save my life. It's one of those things where you didn't grow up with it, and they couldn't say the word right, and that was their telltale sign that, oh, this is an Ephraimite. And they end up killing a total of 42,000, all in all. So when you compare it with the other mighty man of valor, I'm sure that's got to be in the text to key you in, hey, remember Gideon, the man who was kind, generous to the Ephraimites, turned them away with a kind word and praise. And the next guy who runs into the Ephraimites ends up in a civil war, basically. Slaughters a whole bunch of them, takes back the land that was a victory of them and God. I don't see him being the good guy. I think this just keeps devolving worse and worse. And there's some room for gray. Like there's some of that, like, okay, what was he doing with that gang he had early on? You don't quite know. Did he call them the Ephraimites? Did he not? We don't really know. There's some room for vagueness, and I think that's intentional because it's not, I don't think it's supposed to be clear cut all the time with these judges. So yeah, there's a lot to the story of Jepthah. But let's look at question 13, and I say at least we can point to some of the early sincerity stuff. So base it on this story. What are some evidences that a person is sincerely serving God?
And they put away the things that God is opposed of, like legitimately, in terms of out of their life,
Yeah.
and make it a point to not do those things, or I guess not to do those things.
Yeah. Or we can do insincerity in the story too. There's probably more room for that.
Yeah, because even if they didn't destroy the idols, they still put them away.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I keep thinking about Bill Miller. Because Bill Miller would watch TV. But he had a TV in his closet for years. I mean, literally. He decided he's not going to watch TV. So listen to the radio, had cassette tapes, like that stuff. And I used to say, hey, Bill, you want me to set up your TV for you? No, I'm not going to, stay there for the day. Just, so you can put something away, but I guess you got to be a pretty good guy to do that.
Yeah.
That you just leave it there, So they could have been sincere. I don't know why they would save them unless they thought there was some kind of monetary value to it, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
That's funny.
I don't see a lot of sincerity
Yeah.
in this thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's okay.
Yeah. Do you have something, Ron? Yeah, the look on your face.
We did do what he was bound to do, though.
Yes, he did.
Such as it is.
He had honor, I guess.
Lots of feelings, but
Yeah, he did seem to keep his word. I mean, whatever he spoke,
Yeah.
he did.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a man of his word, whether it was a good word or bad. And that's debatable, but he had a degree of integrity that
Mm-hmm.
wherever he was landing with something, if he said it, that's where it's at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's probably a lot we could dig into with, like, even his motivations, like we were talking about earlier with him being an outcast.
Yeah.
Like, there's probably a lot of anger and bitterness that, like, it's not like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go save my countrymen, I'm sure there's just a whole lot going on there to not a lot of sincerity that I saw. Yeah, maybe when they put away the idols, maybe when he keeps his word. It's funny, the book has, okay, Gideon, that was about faith. Jepthah, that's about sincerity. And then they have a theme for the next one. I haven't looked it over yet, though. And yeah, I just don't see it. I don't see him as being he's not the good guy of this story. I don't see any way to make him that. And he can be complicated, and I think that's okay. And we get a lot of that. Like even Gideon, he was a mixed bag from start to finish, really. Just some lack of faith, but then some really bad stuff. And
likely true back then.
Yeah.
And like you said, they're all connected, but they're not. They're very to their own tribe.
Yeah.
And so they didn't have that sense of together all the time.
Right.
It doesn't seem like that.
Yeah.
It seems like they were more tribal, we need this.
Yeah.
So that might cause friction too.
Mm-hmm. Well, and different areas sometimes had different judges, and they don't all seem to be affected by the same judge at times. And I think the book is going to kind of start building a case for, hey, we needed that righteous king. They tried with Abimelech, and he was a very unrighteous king. But you are starting to see, like, hey, you know what, this fractured group does need to be kind of fit together a little better and actually be under God, however that needs to happen. But yeah, so that is the story of Jepthah. Whole long story of Jepthah, his whole life. But before we close, any thoughts, questions, concerns? Seems pretty straightforward.
Oh, we did try to have some diplomacy with the other, wasn't just a knee-jerk reaction, we want to go over and start fighting right off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you really wanted to get into it,
Right.
but that's what it led to, but at least there was some dialogue,
Yeah.
which, as a king, I mean, kings would send messages to other kings,
Mm-hmm.
and, try to resolve things that way before, full-out war.
Yeah, but not so much that they eat fries or whatever.
Those people are looking for a fight all the time.
Yeah. Well, and that is like an interesting thing to point out that
Yeah, everybody said they always want to fight somebody. So he said, okay, we'll fight.
well, and it's probably a little bit of like how sometimes it's easier to be like nicer to someone out and about as opposed to family. You know, sometimes your greatest wrath is reserved for the people closest to you. I'm sure there's a lot of places we could dig into that. But yeah, it is. As far as I know, I think he's the only judge or potential judge. I don't know if it ever actually calls him a judge, really. He seems to be the only person who actually negotiates at any point with the other people, like with the enemies, which is interesting. But then, yeah, he brutalizes his own, so.
Didn't want to get him mad.
How many years was it?
6 years.
Man, that is not long.
Yeah, I don't know how long it was the time
Right.
for the fight into the gold. I guess maybe not including
It
that.
doesn't say how old he was either.
That's true too, yeah. Yeah, he could have been an older guy, yeah.
Yeah.
The lifespan was back then either.
Yeah. Either way, it's unusually short.
And it was very graceful, but done.
All right. So that is the story of Jepthah. And next week, chapters 12 and 13. But let's close in a word of prayer, and we can get going. Father, we thank you for your word and all the different things that we can pull out of it, all the different things that you reveal about yourself and how we relate to you and about your character and, unfortunately, about our character at times. So I just thank you for your word and pray that you would keep some of these truths on our mind throughout the week, that we could think about you and think about how sometimes we can look like this and how we should relate to you and how we can be more of a Christian day in and day out based on the things that we hear in your word. I pray you'd be with us. Bring us back safely next week. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen.